somewhat of a surprise to me. And that is this. You know, people struggle for progress in so many different ways, in so many different venues. And what a wonderful skit that was. You're talking about, you know, the great damage that can be done and is being done by plastic bags. But we make progress along the way, okay? You know, there's enough people here in the room who are old enough to remember when the rivers and the lakes were catching on fire, and we're running cesspools, and you know, when the workplace was an unsafe place to work. I recall the Boat Works, where I used to represent. I mean, kids who were 25, 30 years old, and their lives were over because, for lack of a little ventilation, they were making fiberglass boats. Well, you know what? They're still making fiberglass boats, but now they wear a mask and they have a little ventilation. The point is here that we made a great deal of progress. Okay. We established environmental protection rules and laws and regulations. We established health and safety laws and rules and protections. And the union movement, you know, provided collective bargaining and real representation for people in the workplace. And guess what we did? It was really quite phenomenal. In my grandparents' time, the life expectancy in this country was like 47 years of age. And in a little over a generation, we raised it to 70. Raised it to 70 years of age. No, excuse me, almost 80 years of age. What am I talking about? Almost 80, practically doubled the life expectancy. I mean, Homo sapiens has been on this earth for a long time. But in a little over a generation, we doubled our life expectancy. And now, you know, the very things that made all that possible, the government rules and regulations that gave us air that we could breathe and live a long life with, that gave us, you know, clean and clear water that we could drink and fish in and swim in, they want to roll all that back. That never occurred to me. I mean, I kind of thought that once you reached a level of progress, that, you know, it might take some time for people to get accustomed to it and adjust to it. It had not occurred to me that there would be powerful forces trying to roll all that back. But believe me, there are powerful forces that want to do away with all that. My gosh, it's unbelievable. You know, I'm on the Transportation Committee. We have a dominant group in the country that doesn't want to fund transportation. They don't want to fund infrastructure. Really? What are you talking about? Every business, every labor, every group that cares about this country has come before the Transportation Committee, and they've all said the same thing. Everybody from the chairman of the National Chamber of Commerce to the chairman of the AFL-CIO. Okay, and they said what was obvious: bridges are falling down, trains are coming off the rail, we have less and less money for transportation, it's hurting our economy and our ability to create jobs and to build businesses, and we need to find some new revenue. Pretty simple stuff. We got a group out there running the show. They support devolution. They don't want to fund transportation. And anybody that's ever studied development anywhere in this world has found that transportation and good infrastructure are essential for economic growth and jobs and development and commerce and all the good things that flow with that. But they want to roll all that back. So we're looking at a time here where we're having to spend more time fighting a rear guard, you know, that's trying to roll back the progress that we made. And by golly, for the first time in a little over our generation, the average life expectancy is starting to decline in this country. Imagine that. We can't be satisfied with the great progress that we've made, and people want to roll it all back with the prospect of maybe making another buck somewhere, somehow, and give up on the great progress that we've made. We are in a great battle. We are in a great struggle. I had a conversation recently with someone who you all know and admire, and someone who knows many of the Republican leaders well, and was referring to one of them in particular. I don't have to mention his name, you know who he is. And he said, he's such a nice man, but he's never seen a conflict anywhere in the world that he didn't want to resolve by going to war. That's right. He's never seen a conflict in the world that he didn't want to resolve by going to war. Well, let's just take one war. Let's take the Iraq War. They tell us we spent $3 trillion on the war in Iraq. $3 trillion. Okay? And look where it's got us. Look where it's got in Iraq and Syria. Okay? For $1 trillion of those dollars, by the way, if we hadn't done that, we could have graduated every kid in America from college or vocational school debt-free. Wouldn't that have been? For another $1 trillion of those three, guess what? We could have rebuilt our roads, our bridges, our railroads, our infrastructure, our municipal waste treatment facilities for $1 trillion of those dollars. And guess what? For another one of those $1 trillion, we could have given everybody in America a tax break. Wouldn't that have been nice? No. But they want us to get into more wars in the Middle East. As many of you know, I've lived there. I've studied the language. I was there at a time when they liked us. But I can tell you, and I can take you through the litany, we have financed every single side of that conflict. And if you want to take the time, I can give you the litany, starting with the Mujahideen. We supported them because, well, they were the enemy of our enemy, so therefore they must be our friend. Well, no, they morphed into the Taliban and Al-Qaeda, the ones who bombed our World Trade Center. And people are starting to figure this thing out. You know, there are a lot of things you'd like to do in life, okay? A lot of things you'd like to do in your business, a lot of things you'd like to do in your family. Some of them are good, some of them are not so good. Whether you think going into the more wars in the Middle East is a good idea or not, first of all, you got to question whether or not you can even afford it. Can you afford it? No, we can't. It's bankrupting us. So even if your intentions are so wholesome and so good and so noble, you can't afford it. You can't afford it. And especially if it's going to bankrupt you. Bankrupt you in the process. And some of the things that we do, you can't begin to make up. You can't begin to make up. Congressman Kirk Clausen, Republican, from Florida, and I introduced an amendment on the floor of the House recently to eliminate $600 million from the Defense Authorization Bill that was headed to Syria to train the so-called Free Syrian rebels. Okay? Why? Because we already spent $500 million to train the Free Syrian rebels. And you know how many we got out of it? The commander, Lloyd Austin, commander of the Middle East forces for the United States of America, said we got either 4 or 5. 4 or 5. $100 to $125 million for each one of those so-called rebels that were going to go into the fight and to help us fight ISIL. They were planning to train 5,000. Apparently they trained 54, but none of them came back to duty after Ramadan. They just disappeared into the woodwork, and nobody's really sure what the 4 or 5 were. But the Congress authorized another $600 million for that program. And to my point, we have no friends in that conflict. That is their conflict. It breaks your heart. It breaks your heart to see what is happening there in that part of the world. But we have no friends. And the more money and the more guns and the more bombs and the more munitions we pile into that, the more the violence accelerates and the more the conflict gets prolonged. So we gotta come to our senses here about who we are. And with regard to Iraq, you know, let me remind you, it's not just the $3 trillion. We have a $2 trillion obligation going forward. And as far as I'm concerned, it is a moral obligation, and that is the obligation that is estimated will be another $2 trillion to provide for the veterans who stood up, were willing to serve and protect us. We have an obligation to serve and protect them. But they lost arms, they lost legs, they suffered severe brain injuries, and now we have to take, now we do, and we must, you know, provide and take care of them. So there's $5 trillion. So it's time that we come to our senses. Because everybody in our business life, our personal life, our professional lives, we have to establish priorities. What's important? Do we want clean air? Do we want clean water?
Yes.
Do we want a healthy, safe communities?
Yes.
Do we want healthy, safe places to work?
Yes.
Do we want to see opportunities for our children?
Yes.
So that they can grow up with the same kind of freedom and prosperity that we have and that we enjoy?
Yes.
Do we?
Yes.
We're going to step up and do something to pay back?
Yes.
Are we?
Yes.
Okay, let's say it. Let's do it. Let's mean it. Because Paul Wellstone said it best. He said, we all do better when we all do better. I submit that no generation anywhere in the world or the history of the world has enjoyed more prosperity, has enjoyed more opportunity, has enjoyed more freedom than the generation of this United States. And guess what? They're trying to give it away. They're trying to give it away with these free trade agreements. My God, since NAFTA, probably shouldn't call it NAFTA. 57,000 manufacturing operations in this country have moved overseas. They're costing us millions and millions of good-paying jobs. You know, in our generation, some of you have heard me say this before, in my generation, if you were going to be a failure, you had to have a plan. You know, if you were willing to play by the rules, show up, there was a job for you, go to work, you were going to make a good living, you were going to be able to provide for your family, you were going to have a few bucks left over at the end of the week to go and have dinner with some friends or buy some bait, wet a line, and go fishing for the weekend. We had it good. But guess what? Nobody, the working men and women in this country, they have not had a pay raise in 25 years. And by God, the cost of living has gone up, and that's a net dramatic loss in income. When I travel around this district, I'm frequently stopping at the convenience stores. You know, this district is huge. My God, I live in the middle of it. And, you know, you can't go anywhere for less than, you know, a couple hours one way. So I stop at the convenience stores to get gas and get home and maybe get a cup of coffee. And inevitably, there's a young man or a young woman there working, and you ask them if that's their full-time job, and they'll say, no. You have a full-time? Yes, I do. And I've heard so many times people say, well, you know, it's a good thing we're creating lots of new jobs in this country because you need 2 or 3 of them to make a living. So, is that what we want to leave our children? Are we going to stand up? Are we going to pay it forward? Are we going to put an end to these free trade agreements? I've studied the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement, and it breaks my heart that here we are in a democratic society, and you don't know what's in it. And you are not allowed to know what's in it. And as someone who's gone down and read the classified documents, I know what's in it. But I'm under an obligation of law not to tell you what's in it, because it's classified information. negotiated by 600 of the biggest multinational corporations in the world, okay? And they're taking our good jobs away from us. They're taking our country away from us. They're taking the American dream away from us, which is not about everybody becoming the head of a multinational corporation, being an upper 1%er and making $6 million a year. No, it's making a good living to provide for your family. That's what the American dream is all about. And we've got to come to our senses. As a generation that benefited more from the great progress, we cannot allow them to continue to roll that great progress back. In fact, we've not only got to stop that, we got to take us to the next level. And if nothing else, get rid of the damn plastic bags that are polluting.